back to today's tutorial. Today's tutorial is going to be all about macro photography and how we can use different retouching techniques to retouch specifically a macro eye. I want to do a couple of videos on macro photography in particular because I think there are a few things to watch out for when you are retouching things that are so close up. It does sort of have a different feel to it when you are using these retouching techniques, and although they are mainly the same techniques and same processes that I usually do use, so such as dodge and burn, I pretty much use that for a lot of different things. We do need to just be aware of a few different things when you are retouching macro photos. I wanted to start off with retouching a macro eye today and a little bit of makeup as well, so we can kind of navigate through this. And I wanted to show you guys what I would usually do in this situation. Obviously, I am using dodge and burn today, so as always, if you haven't checked out my dodge and burn tutorial, feel free to go and check it out. I've left the link in the description box below. And now we are going to get straight into the tutorial and get onto editing this eye. So first off, again, I just want to give my blog another plug quickly. I have recently launched it, and if you do sign up, you will get a free Photoshop action. So if you sign up to the email list, that will be yours. And I will be having a lot more educational content on there. So if you do want to go over there and check it out, I'm hoping to get more and more tutorials and articles up in the next few weeks. So feel free to go and check that out. So now straight onto the tutorial, I am going to bring up my dodge and burn layers as usual. So obviously you guys know mainly the way that I like to do this is by using the curves adjustment layers. I pretty much talk about this in many of my Photoshop tutorials these days. So I'm just going to bring up a new layer though first, and I'm going to name that healing. This is for all the healing tools that we're going to apply. And then I'm going to bring up my two curves adjustment layers, bringing the bar up for dodge, and Control and I to invert that. We'll name that dodge. And then the same thing for the burn layer, but we're going to bring the line down, and Control and I. Now we've got our dodge and burn layers, we've got our healing layer as well. I'm going to tidy up the image first. This is how I like to go about mainly any of my retouching processes, specifically with beauty photography. I just like to clean up the image a little bit. So I can see we've got a few stray hairs here that we're just going to remove. So I'm going to get the spot healing brush tool just over here. I'm going to make it a bit smaller. And then I'm going to start to remove some of the stray hairs. And just remove anything that I feel like is maybe a little bit bumpy on the skin as well. So any spots that I do want to remove, although there's really not too many in this image. I'm just going to quickly remove the rest of those little strays. We'll just tidy up the brows there. And just a couple at the top as well. We'll just kind of remove just to tidy it up a bit. And then I'm going to start to remove any little spots. So I'm really wanting to keep these freckles though in this image. So I do want to keep that pretty well retained. Although I am going to add them a little bit more back in at the end because sometimes it is hard to do that with dodge and burn. But I'm just going to keep removing any little bumps that are a little bit too big or stand out a little bit too much and sort of draw the attention away from the makeup and the eye. This is a really good opportunity if you're retouching a macro eye as well. It's a really good opportunity to get rid of any fallout from makeup, which does tend to happen quite a lot. And when you are that close in, it's almost impossible not to see or not to get fallout. It's a very tricky thing, but you can remove it quite easily. And I would generally take this opportunity to do so early on. However, there's really not too much fallout here. We're looking pretty good at the moment. All I'm going to do for the makeup really is just tidy it up a little bit around the edges and just smooth it out a bit, but it's pretty great to start off with. So I feel like I've done most of what I need to do with the healing tools. Now I'm going to go onto the dodge layer here, and I'm going to get my paintbrush and making the brush size a bit smaller, probably around maybe about 60 pixels, I think, for this. And I'm going to make sure the flow is at 1%. Okay, so keeping in mind though for macro images, I do tend to say this as a standard, try not to zoom in too far because you're already zoomed in so far with this macro image, you can see a lot of what's going on. And if you zoom in too far, you're going to start to remove a lot of texture without realizing it. So I like to keep a pretty fair distance away, but not too close. So I'm just going to drag this down a little bit and we're going to start to work on this under eye area. Now we don't want to remove all of the under eye area. I'm a pretty big advocate for keeping a lot of the texture in the under eye area and not touching it too much. But I am going to start to dodge just in the areas where the skin is looking a little bit uneven. And just kind of lighten up this area. So I'm going to continue just to lighten up this area and I'm going to start to work on mainly most of the under eye area here and just over the bridge of the nose. So I'm going to start working on that now, and I will fast forward a few of these bits because as usual, you'll be here a very long time if I don't. But if you feel like you're pretty confident with this step, you can skip ahead if you like, or you can watch through step by step. And now I'm going to step in with the burn layer and switching over to this layer, and then I'm going to start to burn in some other areas. We have to remember to keep using the burn tool as well as the dodge tool because you will end up having a very lightened under eye too much and you won't have much depth to the skin tone. So we're going to start to burn just some of these areas in as well, and just underneath where the eye makeup is too, just to smooth that area out. You guys can see that I've just dodged in this area here and just underneath the eye, just to bring that shadow down a little bit more. I'm now going to work on this inner corner. Now this is stuff that you wouldn't usually have to look so closely at for certain beauty images, but because we're up so close, we just need to be mindful that the makeup is looking really, really good at its best and that everything is looking very even. So I'm going to go back to the dodge tool and we're going to just work on this inner corner, just lightening up some of these areas here and smoothing out this area of the eye. And I'm just going to drag this highlight down a little bit as well, just to make sure everything is blending really nicely. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the top of the eyelid, and you can see just in this area here, there's a little bit of oil on the skin and this part of the makeup has just rubbed off slightly. So we're going to actually bring that back in just a little while. But for now with the dodge and burn tool, I just want to make sure that this top part of the eyeshadow is looking really soft and really even. It is kind of dropping just around here, and we're just going to go to the burn tool to correct this. So I'm just going to make my brush size a little bit bigger Got it at about 250 at the moment. And then I'm just going to sort of softly deepen these areas with the brush. And after I've sort of done a bit of a soft run through with that brush, I'm going to make the brush size a little bit smaller and then start to just kind of lift up that red with the burn tool. Just filling in any little gaps here as well. And then also with the dodge tool, I can see that there's just a few uneven spots here just on top of the eyelid. So I'm just gonna fill them in with the dodge tool. And just removing any other unevenness in the upper eyelid area. Okay, so I want to show you guys a quick before and after of our progress. So the original image was this, and this is what we've made it now. So we've really smoothed out the skin tone a little bit more while still retaining a lot of the texture, which is exactly what we want. Now for my next move, I'm going to start to brighten the eye. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit further. I'm going to stay on the dodge layer. I'm going to get the paintbrush tool up. And then I am going to make it a bit bigger. So usually I like to make the brush size when I'm lightening the iris. I usually like to make it roughly the size of the iris itself. So let's say about 290 pixels or so for this. And then I'm going to start to lighten up the iris. Just softly lightening this area. And then I'm going to go to the burn layer. And what I like to do here with the burn tool is I like to make the brush size a bit smaller and then just go around the rim of the iris, just to kind of deepen up that area. And sometimes I'll go in the middle of the iris too and just kind of bring the middle part down a little bit just to give it that depth. And I'm just going to zoom out. So we've given the iris a little bit more depth there. You can see a little bit more light. And then I usually go back to the dodge tool and actually just brighten up the sclera as well, which is the white part of the eye. That's something that you shouldn't really forget about doing. Now for the next part, I'm actually going to remove some imperfections, but by using the paintbrush tool. So I'm going to get up a new layer and I'm going to rename this makeup for this particular adjustment that I'm going to make now. Making sure I've got the paintbrush tool selected, I'm actually going to zoom in and then hold down Alt on the keyboard and select one of the reddish pink tones from the eyeshadow. I'm then going to start painting on very softly on the areas where that color has rubbed off a little bit. So I might just make my flow probably around 2% this time. It just helps kind of with getting the color back. But keeping the eyedropper close to the lash line, I'm just going to make sure we can get the color dark enough just to fill in those spots where it's clearly rubbed off. I'm just going to blend it a little bit Try not to go too heavy with this because you'll start to lose texture. But I just like to move that down. If you've got a larger area, sometimes what I like to do is change the blending mode to color. So the blending modes are just over here, and that will actually help a lot with retaining texture within the parts of the image that you're trying to paint over. For this though, these small types of corrections, it's usually fine. And then I like to go to the burn tool or the dodge tool and just kind of like blend it in a little bit, just darken it a bit. Just like that. And there we go. So I'm just going to click this layer on and off, and you can see that it's just kind of extended that color down a little bit to where it had rubbed off. Then the next adjustment that I'm actually going to do is the sclera. So you can see that we've got some little blood vessels and things like that running through that we do want to clean up a little bit. So I'm going to create another layer, and this one's going to be called sclera. I'm then going to, once again, staying on the paintbrush tool, I drop kind of a gray white color from around the sclera, and then I'm going to start to paint over that area. And this will just help with any imperfections showing through too much. And what you can do if you've got little veins and little blood vessels still showing through, sometimes I'll just go down to the healing layer, get the spot healing brush tool, and then just start to remove some of those areas like that. Now, keeping in mind, I don't like to tidy this up too much because sometimes it can look a little bit strange and you start to look a little bit doll-like. So sometimes I'll use the clone stamp tool as well on the side here, and just holding down Alt to select. That does tend to help quite a bit. I'm just going to show you guys what that's done to the sclera with the healing, and then also with that layer too. So it's looking a lot better now. The only thing that I would start to work on a little bit more as well is just the eyelashes here. I'm just going to get the spot healing brush tool again and just get rid of any sort of stray ones that are looking a bit strange. I'm going to create another layer quickly. And I'm actually just going to add in a couple of eyelashes. So just going to the brush tool, changing the hardness to roughly 80% and making the brush size smaller. I'm then going to go over to the brush settings and click on shape dynamics, making sure that pen pressure is selected. I'm then going to change the flow to a little bit heavier, say around, say 23%. And then making sure black is selected as the color. I'm then just going to start drawing on a couple of eyelashes, and you can make the brush size a little bit bigger if you find that that works. And just kind of following where all the other eyelashes are kind of coming from in terms of their flow. I'll just add a couple more based on that. And you'll be able to see as well, sometimes it just does make all the difference. Just adding those extra few in really completes the eye look. So I'm going to just leave it as is like that, just with a few extras, and then I'm going to go back to the burn. and making the hardness really soft again and just bringing up the brush size. We're going to change the flow down to, say, between 1 and 3%. And then I'm going to start to burn in these areas just a little bit more over the eyelashes. Alright, so everything's looking really good at the moment. The thing that I'm going to actually tweak now is the freckles. So staying on the burn layer, I'm just going to get my brush and start to kind of darken up these freckles, these freckled areas, and just start to kind of create a little bit more texture in this area. We really want them to stand out. I'm not really going to touch the eyebrows too much in this image either. I'm actually just going to swipe the brush over them in just a sec, the burn tool, and just after I've done these freckles. Okay, so I'll just turn that on and off, and you guys can see that that's kind of added in a more of a freckled effect down the bottom here. Just going to fill in that little gap there with the dodge tool. It's like stuff like that sometimes just really catches your eye and you haven't been looking at it, and sometimes you just realize that things need to be done in certain areas. And one more thing I'm going to do to really enhance the eye at the moment is I'm going to bring up a new layer, and I'm going to name this Iris. And staying with the Paintbrush tool, I'm going to pick kind of a similar color to the eye from the palette over here. So probably like kind of like a dark blue kind of color. It doesn't have to be exact because we're actually going to put a blending mode on it. And then I'm going to just kind of paint that over the iris very softly. And then I'm going to change the blending mode to color dodge. And I find that this does really help to add a little bit more color into the iris and help it stand out that little bit more. I am going to just change the opacity on it though, because I don't want it to look too unnatural. We want it quite soft, so I'm gonna probably just leave it maybe at about 40%. And I'm pretty happy with how that looks at the moment. So the only other thing that I was going to do was a bit of global dodging and burning. So what we were doing before was local dodging and burning, quite close up. So now I'm going to do a bit of global dodging and burning, which is further away. It's using a larger brush and giving the overall image depth. So I'm going to go to the burn layer and start to swipe across just this area of the eyebrow. I'm just going to darken just a few patches up a little bit. And that's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to deepen up, just using a big brush, just deepen up the areas of the eyeshadow in the inner corner and underneath the eyelid as well. And then also getting the dodge tool, I'm going to make it a little bit harder. I usually do for global dodging and burning, just for the highlights. And then I'm just going to slide it across any areas that require a little bit of dodging, just over the highlights mainly. Okay, so now I would go on to the color grade of the image, and like a lot of my beauty images, I don't tend to add too much in terms of a color grade. I just want to make sure the main features of the image are standing out. So I'm going to get my black and white adjustment layer, which is under the adjustment panel. And then I'm going to bring down the reds and the yellows, and usually I will choose luminosity as a blending mode for this. So we're going to bring back even more texture into the image and a bit of depth. So I like to also change the opacity once I've made my main adjustments there. And then I'll get another black and white layer on top and just easily sort of bring that down to usually under 10%. So I'm going to say for this one, maybe around 6%. Then I'm going to brighten it back up a little bit because the black and white layer does tend to darken it that little bit. So usually I get a curves adjustment and just brighten it up a little bit. And another way that I like to do this as well is by going into channels, holding down Control and clicking RGB. And as you guys may know from watching my other tutorials, this will give you a luminosity mask selection. So we can use that selection, go back to our adjustments. We can bring up an adjustment layer for levels. So this will just help brighten up the most brightest parts of the image, which is good. That's really what we want to do. So I'm just going to move those highlights up a little bit, make them stand out a bit more. And then I'm going to bring up a selective color. So this is one of my favorite ways to do a bit of a color grade, especially with beauty images. I'm actually going to move the reds just across a little bit because I really want this to stand out. Usually I would bring the reds down, but in this case I really feel like they need to be a little bit stronger. Then going to the whites, neutrals and blacks, that will help me color grade the majority of the image without really needing too much else. So I'm just going to play around with a few of the sliders there. And see what kind of colors are working. And go to the whites. Okay, so I'm just going to click that on and off and show you guys what that's kind of done. It's given us a really nice warm color grade. I might even just bring up a photo filter and see if any of these are kind of working well for it. I actually quite like the yellow filter because I feel like it gives it a bit of an unearthly warm tone to it. So I'm going to bring that down though a little bit to say around 9%. And you can see just by adding that, it's kind of giving this really nice warmth. I'm actually going to take a snapshot now. And usually at this stage, I would save this file as a PSD and then I would flatten the image and sharpen it as a final touch. So I'm actually going to just flatten the image now for the sake of this tutorial. Take another snapshot and then we're going to do our final sharpening, which is dragging this layer into the new layer box. Going to filter, other, high pass, and leaving it at around 9 pixels is fine for this and clicking OK. Then I'm going to switch the blending mode to overlay and we're going to move the opacity down. Now usually sharpening a macro image is really important. I do find that you're just focusing on so much more detail, so it's important that that detail is nice and sharp. And I'm probably going to just leave it at around 40% opacity roughly. So now I'm going to take a snapshot and I'm going to show you guys the whole before and after of this image. So this is the before and this is the after. So I hope you guys have really enjoyed watching this tutorial. If you have any requests for macro tutorials in particular, whether you would like to see other macro tutorials like this one or just general beauty retouching tutorials, please let me know. I'm always really eager to find out a little bit more about what you guys want to see on my channel. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do, and I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye!